The Social Development Department will work with the Border Management Authority. This is to ensure that children are protected over the long Easter weekend. Officials also planning to work with their counterparts in neighboring countries to verify the documents of minors. And joining me for this conversation is African Diaspora chairperson Dr Vusumuzi Sibanda. Dr. Sibanda, good evening to you and thank you very much for your time. I think we can all remember that much publicized issue of children who were coming from Zimbabwe unaccompanied in a bus load. Talk to us about how worried you are as an organization about incidents such as that one and whether you play any role when it comes to the transportation of children unaccompanied by guardians.
Thank you very much, Tony, and good evening to your listeners too, and your viewers. Well, look, I think the times that are like this, when we're going for Easter, when we are likely to have a lot of people on the road, are obviously very, very worrying, because when we have got children that are traveling, like what happened in December, and they are unaccompanied and they don't have proper documentation, these are children that become susceptible to human trafficking that can easily be stolen and sold. And, it becomes an issue that, is so close and dear to us. And we're happy when the government, starts to get involved and wants to involve, neighboring countries, so that the issue of children traveling without proper documentation, because the issue is without proper documentation. If they have documentation, they will be put in proper transport, and that will reduce the incidence of children being stolen or some are going missing.
That particular incident, Dr. Sibanda, just remind our viewers what the explanation was from the Zimbabwean government, because there was somewhat of an explanation as to why these children were transported without any adult accompanying them.
Look, for starters, at some stage when we spoke to the government of Zimbabwe, it actually disputed the numbers and said it was a relatively small number, that was traveling, for purposes of visiting. It wasn't there. So, I think there was no accountability that was really taken precisely to deal with the issue, to the extent that it was almost, explained to us as an issue that was over-exaggerated, but that wasn't the case.
And you're so right, because the Zimbabwean government somewhat wanting to shirk responsibility there, even though the bus did indeed come from Zimbabwe. Let's then talk broadly about this. How often have you had incidents such as this one, where children are transported from countries, neighboring countries, into South Africa simply because their parents are working in South Africa, and therefore this is a way of them visiting their parents in order for them to have, some kind of gathering. Is that something that you encourage as an organization, or perhaps are there better ways of handling this by parents themselves?
Look, I think that's a very, very prevalent problem, and it's not only sometimes children that get just put, into these, transporters, because even in the busing industry itself, you find that there are some buses that ordinarily do not want to comply with, rules and regulations of even transporting, children, because ordinarily you wouldn't transport people that are without documentation. But you've noticed that you get teenagers that are put in buses alone, they don't have complete documentation. And we've come across those incidents, and they're very, very worrying, because, the children end up, in serious, problems or getting lost. Now, the issue of children traveling, even longer distances, if children have got proper documentation, they are put in proper transport, tickets are bought. Of course, we know that, especially with the border, the Mosina Bay Bridge border post, because of the delays ordinarily and the queues, it becomes a bit dangerous, unless if it was, a trip that that there are not so many stops where they can easily, end up getting lost because they've been on the queue for about maybe 5, 6 or 7 hours while they're waiting to get their passport, stamped. But it is a very serious problem, and we encourage parents to make sure that children have got proper documentation. because there is no country that probably doesn't have passports for people that want to visit. So if parents want children to visit, the first thing that they need to do is to make sure that children have got passports that are properly stamped at the border, so that they know that if the children are coming to South Africa for 2 weeks, because they cannot get that leave during the course of the year, they can do that.
Yeah. As we taper down our conversation, I can hear your little one in the background there. Important messaging at a time like this, Dr. Sibanda, particularly on cases such as this one. What kind of messaging should come primarily from government authorities during this time? The South African government, it does seem that they are ahead of the curve, communicating timelessly. Is that something that should and must be replicated by its neighbors?
Indeed, that is something that's very, very important, and we need all governments. The rights of children are very, very paramount. What people do not realize that parents that get children transported without proper documentation, they're actually violating the rights of children, and they're putting children in danger. So we need a system of communicating between governments, and that will ensure that at least punishment should be meted to parents that just throw children into these, in some cases, unlicensed transporting companies that are so irresponsible enough to take children that don't have proper documentation, across the borders. So we would really encourage all governments to work together to ensure that these syndicates, because these transporters have become syndicates that just take children and transport them for the purposes of money, making money more important than the rights and the safety of these children. So we encourage the neighboring countries as well, like Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Malawi, Lesotho, to make sure that they also put down laws and regulations that are going to ensure that parents that are going to be found violating these laws are going to be punished and probably imprisoned, so that they are discouraged from doing so.
Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda, thank you very much for your time.